or will you need to click through it for me if you've put it up?
No, I'll click. If you just tell me when to move on, I'll click. So, welcome everyone to our webinar on managing workload. We hope that this is going to be useful for you this evening. So I'm going to start off by handing over to my colleague Emma Clark. There's 3 of us delivering this evening. So I'll start off by handing over to Emma, and then Ruth and I will chip in with some hints and tips afterwards. So I'll get this to move on. There we go, Emma.
Thank you. I think it's really difficult when you're talking about workload because there is no magic bullet, is there? There's nothing that anybody's going to say tonight that's going to revolutionise the amount of work that you've got coming in. But hopefully I'm going to start talking about some research that I've been involved in that will either make you feel better knowing that you're in the same boat as everybody else, or it might give you some kind of support or remind you probably of some of the things that you might want to do that you have been doing and that might have slipped as your workload has increased. So some kind of I think they're quite comforting quotes that might make you feel that your experience is understood. So there's this idea that when you start teaching, there's a reality shock as you start to embrace the whole sort of complexity of teaching, and as all these other aspects come at you that maybe you didn't fully experience in your training or at the start of your ECT period. So as the kind of workload increases, there's this idea of a dramatic and traumatic reality shock, which I have seen certainly working with ECTs and NQTs as they were, and also students. So if you're in that position, you're not alone. It's a well-known phenomenon. You're one of many that's experiencing this at the minute. So I hope that's slightly comforting before we go on to talk about ways around that reality shock. And Perryman, I can't recommend Jane Perryman's work enough. It's really accessible, her research really readable. She's been researching workload and performativity in teaching, I think, for something like 25 years. So she's got a massive kind of backlog of really useful research data and also really useful ideas about supporting workload in schools. So she has coined this term as a discourse of disappointment between your expectations of teaching and then what teaching turns into, particularly as an early career teacher. So we're going to talk about some way to navigate that discourse of disappointment. And I'll end with a cheerier quote from Perryman at the end as well. So if I talk about some resources that I've done, I was involved in an international project looking at challenges and resources in relation to workload for trainee teachers, and then some research looking at experiences of newly qualified teachers during the COVID pandemic. And we looked at challenges and resources in terms of well-being and workload over the year. So I'll talk about some of the key challenges that the trainees identified, and then some that are going to be relevant for you as early career teachers. So they talked about things like confidence and motivation with their studies, because obviously when you're learning to teach, you're also engaged in either a PGCE or an undergraduate degree. So there's that kind of academic work. They also highlighted issues of work-life balance, knowing when to seek help, and relationships within the programme and relationships with mentors in school as well was cited as a challenge for the trainees in terms of their well-being and workload. So for you, as an ECT teacher, these are the ones that are probably going to be transferable. So things like confidence, not necessarily with your studies, but confidence engaging in CPD, confidence in the classroom is a key issue, a key challenge in relation to workload, actually. Issues of work-life balance, knowing when to seek help, and relationships are all suggested to be challenges for early career teachers that flow into your workload, flow into your feeling of confidence in school. So this is a piece of research that I was involved in with early career teachers, or NQTs as they were at this stage, and these were the key challenges and areas where they didn't feel prepared, aspects they suggested impacted on increased workload. So things like behaviour management, we sampled them in the autumn, the spring and the summer, which is where there are 3 different areas. You can see behaviour management, assessment and communication with parents were key issues in terms of workload. Planning, a lack of classroom experience, particularly in this research because the participants were in that bridge between experiencing COVID as part of their training, so having reduced experience in school, and then sometimes working in schools that were in bubbles or where they were doing a lot of online teaching. Working with students with SEND, pastoral issues, phonics, which is more of a primary issue but can flow into secondary as well, and then things like planning. So these were issues that were all suggested to add to students, early career teachers' workload. And then we also looked at resources. So challenges were things that made their life more difficult. Resources were things they drew on to support them to navigate some of those challenges. And again, I'll talk about resources for trainees and then what might help you as an ECT as well. There's nothing here that's going to surprise you. I wish I had some revolutionary guidance. All of this you're going to be really familiar with, but sometimes it helps to just review it and revise it. So they were the issues or the resources that the trainees had highlighted. And for you as early career teachers, some of this is going to be transferable as well. So resources for you as early career teachers are likely to include things like that relationship support from family, from friends, particularly it was highlighted friends in education. So friends and family who are teachers, who work in the wider sphere of education, who've got some understanding of the context you're in and the particular challenges. Sharing experiences was really key for the trainees in this research. They always felt better when they had shared the experience they've got, and that kind of links back to that challenge of when to seek help and knowing who to seek help from. Learning from experience, they all said the more they did, the better they felt. And again, the suggestions, there's parity with that as an early career teacher. As you flow through your career, some of the issues that challenge you in relation to workload. So, for example, thinking about planning and assessments and the things that were highlighted before become less of an issue. But the ones for me that were really key is this idea about relationships that came through as a real resource, something really, really supportive in terms of your workload. For my student, it was the teachers on placement. For you, it's likely to be the teachers that you work with, the teachers in your school, your mentors, or the other teachers in your department if you are secondary. And if you click on Louise, there's a table, I think, on the next slide, which suggests here that key resources for early career trainees, almost all of them suggested that year group colleagues or departmental colleagues were really key in this. So the main sort of finding really from this research, and again, it's not revolutionary, it's not going to be a huge surprise to you, is that talking to people, sharing your experiences, working closely with colleagues can be really, really supportive in terms of your workload, in terms of sharing good practice, getting ideas, sharing resources, and just feeling supported as well. The Perryman research that I was talking about earlier, she suggested that one of the key issues in relation to workload was not necessarily the volume of work we have to do as teachers, although that is an issue, but it was the idea about engaging in work that feels meaningful and purposeful to you. And she suggested that a lot of that can be done in discussion, or a lot of the enthusiasm about the work we need to do can be generated through relationships and discussions with colleagues, mentors, people within your school, people within your department. So the idea about seeking support from this research that I was talking about, and also from Perryman's research, is finding the purpose in the work that you are doing. When your workload or aspects of your workload feel really purposeful, then workload is not cited as such an issue. If you just click onto, I think it's the last slide now, Louise. So one of the findings, the more recent findings from Jane Perryman and her research, was that actually when she surveyed teachers who were happy in school and who had all brought up workload as an issue, but said they would remain in teaching or were really enjoying teaching, actually she found a really close link between what they expected when they went into teaching in terms of rewards and the actual rewards they gained from teaching. So there is that kind of idea of the reality shock and the sort of traumatic birthing, I suppose, into being an early career teacher. But research also suggests that what you expect of teaching, why we go into teaching, is often borne out. A little bit of a more positive note, maybe, to end on.
Yeah. Thank you, Emma. Some interesting stuff there, and I think the importance of that sort of pastoral and emotional support is really key here, isn't it? So yeah. Okay, Ruth, do you want to kick off, and then I'll chip in on some upcoming. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. I'm on now. Okay, so the next couple of slides again are looking at some data from workload. So if you just look at the table in the centre, you can see this goes back from 2010 up to 2019. 2019 is the latest statistics we have on this. There hasn't been a survey done yet for, well, it should have been done last year, but nothing's been published. So this is DFE data taken from their workload survey, and it's just really highlighting to us the number of hours that teaching, planning, assessment, everything takes up per week. So on average, you can see we are averaging primary and secondary approximately 50 hours per week. Now, again, we're not sharing these statistics to highlight, you know, the lack of time, which I'm sure you're all very aware of, and the pressures on time. It's just really to highlight that you're not alone. And if you are feeling like it's a big job, and teaching is, that data here supports that. However, as we go further on, we've got some hints and tips to manage that 50 hours a week. Again, I've just included this slide really just to give you a little bit more data, but just to point out again, even if you're in an outstanding school, a requires improvement school, a local authority, maintained school, not that there's very many of those around now, or a multi-academy trust, again, you can see we are averaging around 50 hours per week. If you want to pick up on that survey and look at more details, the link is at the bottom. So if you go into that, you will see a lot more data around workload, and it's broken down a lot further. The next couple of slides also pick up on surveys that have been collected via the teachers' unions. So this one is from the NEU, and we can see here that they have looked into this. Obviously, the unions are very hot, aren't they, in terms of workload. They're always fighting for us, the unions. That's one of the beauties of being attached to a union. But in that document here, it's saying that in terms of number of days per year, a full-time teacher must be available for 195 days. The teacher may be required to teach 190 of those days. The additional 5 would be your inset days and non-contact time. And then there's a question being raised here: are there any limits to working hours for full-time teachers? So if we look at the legalities of this, we can see that number of teacher hours, directed teaching time, and other professional duties is subject to a limit of 1,265 hours within our teaching year. Okay, so this is where, though, we can see a little bit of a grey area, isn't it? Directed teaching time and other professional duties. So, as I say, the unions are always fighting for us in school, and they're often fighting to clarify that grey area as well. On the next slide, we've got some data from another union, a different union. This is the NASUWT. And this is taken from their Wellbeing at Work survey. And this is quite recent. So this was done just about a year ago. Now, if we think back to that time as well, we were just coming out from COVID. So if we look at this data, we've got to take into consideration perhaps that impact of COVID as well. But we can see that 11,857 teachers responded to this survey. And let's look at the data. So 90% of teachers have experienced more work-related stress in the last 12 months. 91% have reported an adverse effect on mental health. 64% that their job has affected their physical health. And you can see the next one, 52% say that workload has been a main factor in the stress that they've felt under. So again, the data for us, sadly, doesn't perhaps paint a pretty picture, but you're not alone. So if you're at that point, and I think we're just emerging, aren't we, from winter, which is the hardest term as well. So between October and now really is the longest term in terms of daylight hours for us, going in the dark, coming back in the dark, and we can sometimes feel quite isolated. But data is there. And as I said, the unions do fight for us to try and reduce that workload, and they've made a substantial impact over the years as well. So let's have a look then, what can we do to help manage that workload? What can we do, practical things, to help you within that working week? So one of the biggest things to remember is that it's good enough. We don't have to be a perfectionist in everything that we do. And I think Louise will probably talk about this as well, that, you know, we've got to get to a point where, yeah, that is good enough. We can't spend any longer perfecting that resource we're making, that lesson plan we're making. That's not to say we don't give it the due time and attention that planning resources deserve, but we can't perfect absolutely everything that we do. We've got to accept that that's okay. And the second point on there, have 1 day a week. I try and do this now, still been trying to do this over 20 odd years. But I do try, Monday is usually the day for me where I do think, right, now I'm going to leave at a certain time on a Monday and get home. Obviously, having 2 small children, like many of you will have, it's time to be with them. So don't feel bad is my message, leaving early. You don't have to stay until 5:30, 6 o'clock every day. And don't feel the pressure to do that. People have different working patterns. Some people go in early, leave a little bit early, perhaps come in a bit later and have a couple of days where they stay later. Do what works for you and your family. So leaving early one of the days is really good advice. And perhaps do something with that day as well. Go swimming, go to yoga, meet your friends, go to the cinema, have a day that you can look forward to. Louise, do you want to come in on those?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from my own research, recent research with ECTs, these 2 things came up. The top one is a particularly big learning curve where ECTs say they're just about managed, not complete perfectionism, but when you're on maybe an 8-week block, you can manage a certain level for 8 weeks. But then when you are, when you're on placement, but then when you are doing this day in, day out, and you are the only one in the classroom, you haven't got a class teacher or a mentor or somebody with you, that is just not possible. It's in the realms of fantasy, and that was quite a big learning curve for some ECTs who've gone into it thinking that all my resources will be pristine and everything will be planned to the nth degree. And the bottom one, a really useful tip, and this again came from one of the ECTs in my research. If you are somebody who's going to try and get away early to maybe go and do some exercise, which we all know is really helpful for our own health and well-being, she actually said booking a class, booking in a slot at the gym was really helpful, because then there was no option about, oh, I'll just do another half an hour, or I'll leave it a little bit later tonight. If you've actually booked in or got a commitment with a friend and you've said, right, I will meet at this time, it's just that extra push to get out of the door when you've promised yourself that you'll do that. So they can be helpful, really small things, but really helpful.
And then the next one here is just, again, thinking about the jobs that you're doing. It ties in, doesn't it, with what we were just saying about perfectionism. But think about what you're doing. Is it purposeful? And what level do you need to go to? Does that piece, that resource really need laminating for you to use? Possibly not. It's little things like that where you think, okay, how and will this actually benefit the pupils? What's the purpose and the point of me doing this? Who am I doing it for? It's probably something to consider. And try and trim things down as well. Really try and be concise in what you're doing. And as the bottom point there on the top one is saying, that effective leaders will listen to your feedback. So if you can see things that you're being asked to do, or perhaps the way that the school operates, schools and leaders should be open to your feedback. So if you come up with suggestions on how to reduce workload, go and share them with your line manager, with your mentor, with your head teacher. Go and have a voice, because I'm sure that will benefit lots of other people as well. And the bottom point, I think, is really key, that it is a job. It's just a job. You have a life as well, and that's something to remember. You know, we don't want our teaching job to be our life. We want to keep in touch with our friends, our family, do other things. So just again, reflect on that and think, are you living to work or are you working to live? You know, what's the balance that you're trying to achieve? But ultimately, our friends and family are really important to us. So within your schools, do you have some support networks? Does your school perhaps have a workload or a wellbeing charter? These are things that the unions, again, really push for schools to have. Do you know who the union rep is in your school as well, if you want to talk about any workload issues? Is there a workload committee where, again, as we've just said, you can go and voice some of your opinions or some of your ideas as well? There's a couple of links on there. So the July 2022 DFE toolkit has been produced as a way of schools to audit their current workload levels. So again, that might be something that you could try and get done within your school, so that there's an audit done, there's a survey done within your school that addresses workload. So again, you can see specifically what's happening in your school, and the link to that is just at the bottom there.
And as well as those key people that Ruth talked about and finding out who those key people are in your school, if you're in a larger school and there's people who've gone through ECT induction relatively recently, they can be really key contacts for you as well, because they've been there probably in that school and have managed their way through it, and they will become a really good form of support for you in terms of, I know I've had feedback that it maybe feels a little bit of a safer conversation almost to have with somebody who's just gone through it, and there's no kind of, you know, pressures from the top or anything like that, but just making sure that you're having those conversations with people who've been in the same position as you relatively recently. So this is just a little bit about the responsibility of the school in terms of ECT induction. And again, this is from the DFE's documents around reducing teacher workload. So the responsibility of the school, they need to ensure that monitoring, support and assessment procedures are in place for all ECTs in the school. You'll have an appropriate body attached to you, usually the local authority, to make sure that those processes are in place. But there shouldn't be any kind of increased workload because you are the ECT as such. You shouldn't be being asked to collect, this is really key here, folders of evidence. That is something that happened quite regularly in the past, but it shouldn't be happening anymore. Maybe evidence trackers, something like that, things to update. Usually the modules that you'll now be enrolled on for the ECF, the Early Career Framework, would have some kind of tracking with them to make sure that you'd attended the relevant CPD and so on, but you shouldn't have massive amounts of evidence there. You also need to make sure that you are getting your full entitlement. So as an ECT, you should be getting your 10% PPA time, but in your first year, you should also be getting 10% ECT time. And in your second year of induction, you should be getting 5% ECT time. And I would really suggest here that you make sure you are spending that time on what you should be spending it on. So don't merge the two. It's very easy to think, oh, I'll use my ECT time as extended PPA time or vice versa. Make sure that you're distinguishing between those two pots of time that you're being given, and think about what you're going to prioritise. Your PPA time will continue throughout your career, your ECT time will not. And that's the time when you should be focusing on your CPD, on the modules that you'll be taking around the Early Career Framework and so on. So please do make sure that you're prioritising your time in those ways. Sorry, Ruth, I'll hand back to you.
That's okay. So Louise just mentioned some DFE documentation, and they do look into reducing workload and produce various, we've seen toolkits for audits and different things. And this was just taken from one of their documents that they have out on reducing school workload, and also to support I know it does say NQT because that's just the time it was written, but supporting NQTs and work-life balance. There's some links again there to click on. And just at the bottom from that reducing workload document by the DFE, they pulled out of their research the 5 areas that were seen to be impacting workload the most for early career teachers. And this ties in with what Emma was saying and her research that she's gathered. So again, nothing that you wouldn't expect to see here. So marking and planning, non-teaching tasks. So that could be, you know, your duties and different things. External factors. Again, some of these are a little vague. So external factors, that might be engaging with parents or other bodies, experience, and also subject knowledge. So as Emma said, you know, you've been immersed in university where you've had that subject knowledge, and then you're going solo, aren't you? Flying solo, and perhaps you haven't got that as much as an ECT. They were the main 5 areas. And this, I've just included this really. I'm sure you've all heard, I've just seen Emma smile, of Stephen Covey and his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you haven't come across this, it's worth having a little read. There are some useful stuff in there. But this is just really trying to get us to prioritise the tasks that we need to get done. How many of us write a to-do list? It just gets longer and longer and longer. And you actually add things on just to cross off. Anybody do that? I know I definitely do that. Well, this is something I should really listen to myself, shouldn't I? But this is a way that you can prioritise those jobs. So we put them into 4 areas. So look at your jobs list and categorise them. So is it important and urgent? That's the firefighting stuff. That's the things that we've got to deal with now. Prioritise those things. Is it urgent but not particularly important? So that might be certain emails. Obviously, it depends on the emails, doesn't it? Top right, so just going through this quickly. Important but non-urgent. And the bottom one, not important and not urgent. Probably those jobs that you add on and cross off just because you want something to cross off. So that's just reminding us really to prioritise that to-do list, all the things you've got to do. What do you need to, when Louise talked about your PPA time and your ECT time, what do you need to prioritise when and in what order?
So just thinking a little bit now about time management, and this is absolutely key, and this is where we start to come in with some sort of helpful hints and tips for you to take away today. First thing, try and break down your goals into sort of short, medium and long term, and by doing this you'll make that end goal easier. So what do I'm trying to get this done by the end of term, by the end of half term. So what do I need to do today? What do I need to do next week? So break it down into more manageable chunks. Try and make it, we've already talked about lists, but lists can be wonderful. They can also be quite dangerous if you just keep adding to them, but make a list and then prioritise. So I've linked this to what Reese just talked about in terms of Stephen Covey's habits there that we've just looked at, but really prioritise. So maybe you've got your list and then you can colour code in terms of actually what needs to be done now, what can I leave until after school, what can I leave until my PPA time on Thursday or whenever it might be. So some positives here. Make sure that you are recognising and rewarding your achievements. So all of those things that you do achieve, think about giving yourself a reward for that. And it might be as simple as, well, I'm going home earlier today, and Tuesday isn't normally a day that I go home early, but I am because I've achieved so much. Or it might be going and treating yourself at the bakery or the supermarket on the way home, but making sure that we are doing that. I know this is really trivial, but this is all to do with your well-being and so on, but get plenty of rest. Don't be at working until all hours, and certainly try not to be on your laptop up until you kind of go to bed, because you are going to struggle to switch off. Try to get into that routine of, this is the time that I am going to switch off, and then I'm going to have some downtime so that you do manage to get that sleep. Take time for a walk. there was loads of stuff out about, you know, the importance of being outside, fresh air. I'm going back to lockdown now, and I think I'm certainly guilty of this. I actually got into some really good habits during lockdown when we were working from home, of making sure I was going out for a walk at lunchtime, I was going out for a walk after work. And actually, I know we're not in lockdown anymore, but I can be as guilty of spending as much time at my laptop and not taking those breaks. So make sure you're doing that. Value your time. Again, this is about having that cut-off point and thinking, I am going to have some time for myself this evening, time with the family, whatever it might be. And think about some time management techniques as well. So it might come down to something like setting a timer and saying, right, this is a task that I want to give some time to, but I can't afford to give all afternoon, all evening to it. So actually, I'm going to set myself half an hour aside, and what I haven't done, when it gets to 30 minutes and that timer or alarm or whatever goes off, that's going to have to wait, or that's as much as I'm going to do. It goes back to the point Ruth said earlier about, you know, good enough. It's good enough. I've spent enough time on that, and it doesn't warrant me spending any more time on it. And then after that alarm's gone off, make sure you take a break, physically walk away from it, go and get some fresh air, look after yourself. So some words of wisdom from my research with ECTs. Take or leave this as you wish. This was a primary ECT, and I'd actually just done a research interview with her, and she said to me at the end, actually, can I go over some things that I've really learned this year and that I think will be some key things for you to pass on to future ECTs? So again, the good enough bit, make sure you're prepared, but don't over prepare. Think about what is doable. Enjoy your time outside of the classroom. And she was talking specifically there about her ECT time, and it was her that really made me reflect on how precious that is, because she said that's something I ain't going to get back. And she was just kind of realizing going into her second year how important that was, to kind of make the most of those opportunities. Only laminate if needed. I think many primary teachers have been guilty of that, me certainly, so yes, absolutely. Book in some end of term treats, so make sure you've got something to look forward to at the end of term, end of half term, whatever it is that you enjoy doing with your loved ones and so on. Don't be tough on yourself, and accept that this is a journey. I know some of us don't like that phrase, that we're on a journey, but yeah, that's how she put it. This has come straight from the horse's mouth as such. Ask questions and be confident when talking to parents, even if you don't feel it. I know that can be a point of, you know, something that makes us very nervous as ECTs, dealing with parents and so on. Spend time observing good teaching and share these ideas with your team. So again, you might manage to magpie something from somebody else in that CPD time, that ECT time that you have. And she said about using what she called a report notebook, but a notebook essentially to note things down about the child over the year. And she said that was helpful when it came to the end of year and writing reports. So this is kind of indirectly linked with workload, because she said if she did that over the year, it actually made writing reports much more manageable for her, which in her first year she had found quite tough. So hopefully a few things you can take away there. Some more helpful resources from different places here, and again I'll put the slides on the blog site so that you can access all of these. And the final few slides are really just about your well-being, and we've already started to touch on this when we're saying, you know, look after yourself, get the rest that you need, go out for a walk, get fresh air and so on. But thinking about both your physical and emotional well-being, and as it says there, when we have good levels of well-being, we feel that life is in balance and that we can generally cope well. And sometimes that can be as simple as going out and having a run at the end of the day or something like that. We feel motivated and engaged, we're resilient and able to deal effectively with daily troubles, as well as bounce back from life's challenges. So make sure that you are looking after yourself in all respects, both that physical and emotional well-being. And just to finish off with some research here, Ruth, do by all means chip in, because I know this was from you as well. But connecting with people around us, remind ourselves how important and valued we are. So that comes back to spending time with friends and family, and make sure that we are booking out that time. Don't get into the, oh, well, I can't do that because it's during the week, I can't go out on a school night. Don't get into that habit, okay? Be active. We've talked a lot about this, but there is that strong connection between staying active and then the positive mental health and well-being. Take notice of your surroundings, your thoughts, your emotions. It's a great way to stay present and to have that understanding of ourselves. Keep learning. That'll potentially meet new people through that, boost your self-confidence, your mental health and well-being. And that might be doing something for yourself. It might be learning a new hobby. Try and do those things for yourself. And give. Research has found that link as well between doing good things and an increase in positive well-being. So think about that as well and what you can do. It's all about boosting ourselves a little bit, isn't it? All of these things. And finally, Ruth, I will let you come in on this one.
That's okay. This is some research I really like, the work of Jenny Mosley. You probably recall this from your secondary session that you will have done with me. In fact, I've just delivered this session a couple of weeks ago to the current cohort. I like her work because it's really simple, and she talks about topping up your wells. It's all around well-being and keeping our wells, imagine it as a physical well, keeping your well topped up. So she uses the acronym of SPICE and talks about spicing up your life. And the way to spice up your life, did you know, is the S stands for your spiritual well. So just again, engaging with nature, you know, just being in awe of nature. You don't have to go tree hugging and things, but just being, you know, spiritually aware of your surroundings, perhaps meditation, the energy that's around you, engaging in different environments. That physical well, so how full is your physical well right now? Is that the one that's a little bit depleted because you haven't had time to go out for those walks, to take part in your kickboxing lesson or your yoga class? The I is your intellectual well. So are you still finding time to read, if that's something that you like to do, or attend the theatre, watch films, you know, debate issues? Are you still finding time to top up that well? How about your creative well? Is that one topped up? Is that one a little bit depleted? But that could be things to do with, Louise just mentioned a hobby, so picking up a new skill. Are you somebody that really enjoys sewing, knitting, cooking, dancing, all singing, whatever it might be? So how topped up is your creative well? And the last one, the E, is your emotional well. We've just picked up on that, the one before. So, you know, spending time with your friends, with your family, that's really important to top up that well as well. So add some spice back into your life. How full are your wells for your well-being?
Okay.